Hello, how are you? Good. Allora, buonasera a tutti, good afternoon everyone, and thanks for coming today to the Rome's lecture series, and welcome to come to my lecture entitled Living in Italy, a Cross-Cultural Journey. And it is a pleasure for me to share with you today some aspects and reflections on my culture. Traveling abroad is a unique and formative cultural experience. In the age of globalization, we're exposed to a world that is home to a great variety of different countries, people, and culture that communicate and interact with one another. Modern means of mass communication and their instant accessibility have reduced the distance between different worlds in just one click away. And I would like to say that these two considerations lead us to the assumption that in a foreign country, of course, local will not act and react the same way we're accustomed to. And this assumption leads us to ask ourselves other legitimate questions. The first one, why do we need to still today to talk about differences in culture? Why understanding differences in culture is so important to have a positive and immediate impact with the foreign culture during our journey? Could we not just assume that in the world we are just different people and accept this fact? Are we not already aware of what the definition and meaning of differences in culture entail? And of course, with you, I would like to reread what are the definition of culture, and of course, all the subtopics that this definition entail. Perceptual structure of human activities that includes behaviors, values, customs, beliefs, languages, rituals, manners, religions, laws, morality of particular country. And so we have to start thinking about it. Do we know all of these subtopics about Italy? And then, of course, with you, I would like to look at the definition of what we call cross-cultural communication. It means that interacting with or comparing two or more cultures and understanding their values, beliefs, and norms. And in our modern global world, I would say that the understanding and the practice of cross-cultural communication is even more essential, not only in the business world, of course, but also when you travel and you sojourn abroad for a long period of time. And what is essential is not to acknowledge the fact that we are different. We already know that. What is essential is to understand and respect the differences in cultures. So being able to recognize these differences and being able to have what we call in cross-cultural studies successful intercultural communications and interactions with locals is the key to avoid confusion, misunderstanding, misinterpretation in our communication. And as soon as we arrive in the host country, what we try to do, we start adjusting to our new environment and we start communicating with locals, or at least we try our best to do so. Verbal communication and body language are one of our first tools that helps us communicating with locals when we are abroad. And even if we do not master the language very well, few basic sentences help us, of course, to get by. And of course, it is essential, and I try to remind that to my students all the time, to say that language is much more, of course, to conveying our thoughts through grammar, structures, and vocabulary. But what is important, and it applies, is our cultural competence, of course. Cultural competence that we have to keep in mind always in our interactions, when, where, how, and why we're saying, conveying our messages. And if the language barrier can sometimes be an obstacle to our interaction, we can always rely on what? On a positive, friendly attitude, using a relaxed body language to facilitate our exchange with our interlocutors. And today I would like to share with you this picture that was took in the city of Florence in 1951 by Ruth Erking, an American photographer and photojournalist who in the same year Life magazine sent on an assignment to Israel. And from there she went to Italy, and it was in Florence that she met Jean Allens, a painter and fellow American. One morning, of course, the two women were talking about their shared experiences traveling alone as young single women, and they decided to go and took some pictures in the city of Florence. In this first picture, Erking, of course, photographed her friend while she's asking for directions. It looks like that, of course, she's holding, as you can see, she's holding a map of a sort of an Italian guidebook that is helping her to discover what is around her. And she's standing, of course, in the middle of the street interacting with the Italian vigile, of course, that is the traffic officer, who is giving her direction, pointing up his finger. See, can you see that he's using body language a lot, along with the explanation and directions. She's standing next to her bike, she starts behaving in a certain way, and or maybe looking at this picture, we have the sensation that she's starting behaving and feeling Italian among other Italians. She's discovered a new city imitating the actions of locals riding her bike. And in cross-cultural study, this is a moment where Erking and his friend are experiencing a particular moment that we define explicit culture. That means that the sojourner, of course, experiences the concrete factors of the culture. What is there, what is tangible, what is visible. And in a certain way, to give an example of explicit culture is not only when you go to visit a museum or admire, of course, architectural monuments, but it also when you start interacting with verbal or non-verbal interactions. We need the use of the language. And again, in the second picture, the explicit culture is displayed. Erking photographed her friend while she's having a wonderful time in Florence. She's sitting outdoor in a cafe talking and maybe flirting, we don't know, with this man that is not Italian because, of course, when we look at the paper, it's reading an English-speaking reading foreign newspaper, The Herald. But when we look at this picture, if it was not for the newspaper, we couldn't even tell if they were not Italian or not. And it looks like that we're watching an old movie. Two foreigners living in the Dolce Vita, enjoying their time in the city of Florence. And of course, by imitating the same gesture and accomplishing the same way of living, of course, of the locals, travelers have the impression that they're immediately overpassed their first obstacles of living abroad. But by living the same lifestyles of locals, the travelers immediately have this kind of sensation to start belonging to their new environment, and in a certain way, they do. Their sensation of being outsiders starts fading away. They start their process of getting accustomed to the culture, to the custom, the ritual, the manners of the host country. And although this might be true, it happens frequently that sojourners tend to confuse these first actions and their first basic interaction with the locals with the knowledge of the core values of the host culture. And what do I mean by saying that? By simply asking directions to go to an art museum or drinking a coffee at the coffee bar, and even if you do it, of course, in Italian and you do your best, it does not mean immediately to be acquainted with the norms of the host country and fully, truly understand the values and beliefs of the host country itself. So it will require you a little bit more effort and time. So drinking a cappuccino in a cafe bar doesn't mean necessarily getting used to the people that they're drinking the cappuccino and why they're acting one way opposed to another. So getting used to the country and to the practical everyday life doesn't necessarily imply an immediate adjustment and understanding of the core values, beliefs, and norms. In fact, of course, it can happen that the sojourner are going to face what at first can be called a cultural or a country shock. And what do I mean by that? The loss of set daily practical routines, okay, can be exciting, of course, at the beginning when you go to a foreign country. It's part of your new adventure, an exciting fact to discover a new way of living. But trust me, in a long process sometimes, it can be tiring. So when you live abroad, the process of adjustment is going inevitably to be constantly interrupted by new cultural contexts. And most of all, it is going to be challenged by intercultural differences. And living this complete immersion experience in another country, of course, will oblige you, of course, to respond not only to the novelties in a non-familiar environment, but to novelties of subtle and complex patterns of daily life. So many kind of adjustments, of course, have to be made at the beginning to start feeling more at ease and more comfortable. So the challenging is not to be, of course, just emotional and more psychological challenge, but it's going to be much more practical at the beginning. The psychological and emotional part, of course, is going to come later on. I don't know if any of you have seen this picture already, and in 2011, it marked the 60th year celebration of this famous picture, American Girl, in Italy. The picture was taken always in 1951, again in the city of Florence, at the corner of the street near the famous pastry shop, il Caffè Gilli. The cafe, now famous for their pastries and art coffee and a perfectly preserved example of Belle Epoque cafe in Florence, became famous worldwide and becoming a tourist destination thanks also to this picture taken by this American photographer. The cafe was a popular destination for writers and artists, but after the Second World War, it was also attended by young people who stopped just outside and enjoying their day and living more the dolce vita. And if we look at this third picture, and looking and considering, I was impressed how a young American woman was walking down the street in a foreign country, in a foreign town, with such a confidence, surrounded by Italian men who were sharing and conveying her their evident interest. In this particular picture, it is evident that no other women, of course, are in the scene, and the looks of these gentlemen are focusing on just one female pedestrian. Although Orkin and Gregg have always declared in their interviews that back in those days they were amused by this unique experience traveling abroad, taking pictures in foreign cities, looking at these photographs, some question and reflection came up in my mind. The first one that I asked myself, and being a woman and being Italian, was if Orkin and her friend, even if just for a moment, I asked myself, was she bothered a little bit by this non-discreet looks? A second question was if these young women, foreign, of course, American, traveling in Italy, would have asked themselves the reason why their simple action of walking down the street would have made them the center of this overwhelming attention. A third one was, just the beauty of this young woman that provoked that kind of attention from this Italian man. Or maybe just the way she was holding herself walking down the street. Of course, her posture conveyed an attitude of confidence, independence, despite the fact that the right arm, if you look closely, folded up against the upper part of her body, and could give the impression also to convey a gesture of self-protection. So it's a mixed signal. And I asked myself another question. If this picture would have been taken in a city in America, would this woman have attracted so evidently the looks of men? American men would in public display this kind of attention and looks? So finally, I wonder if Orkin and her friends would perceive this Italian man as disrespectful, crossing the line of respect towards the opposite sex. And despite, of course, the evident beauty of this young lady, I think the attention of this Italian man was driven by the fact that this foreign woman was walking down the street on her own, conveying an idea of a female independence that was not seen, of course, by Italian men as, I would say, a common and positive attitude, especially for those days. And according to the Italian social and cultural etiquette and norms of that time, but also I would tell you sometimes also in the center-south of Italy, also nowadays, it was not considered appropriate for a young woman to travel in a foreign country on her own. So I presume that Orkin and her friends, of course, perspective, that journey was exciting and, they were having a good time. But in the eyes, of course, of this Italian man, especially from a male perspective, that was not something common and totally accepted for them to see. And of course, it was not a common norm and behavior for a woman, especially at that time. The last picture that I would like to share with you is entitled Gli Italiani si voltano, and it means the Italians, they turn around. Taken by a famous Italian photographer, Mario De Biasi, in 1954 in Milan. And he's considered one of the best Italian photographers of the Neorealism Italiano, the Italian Neorealism, where Italy, of course, at that time was living an economic and social rebirth after the distress of the Second World War. And photography as being one of the means of communication to convey the transformation and the evolution of Italian society of those years. So nowadays, these pictures has become one of the iconic photography representing the Italian society of those days. So De Biasi was asked by a film magazine to make a reportage on photo shoots having as a protagonist a young woman walking around the city. And in this picture, again, an Italian woman is walking down the street and attract even more evidently the attention of the opposite gender. And looking at the photo, we have the sensation that the picture is almost staged, directed, and not natural, though she seemed confident in her posture while she's walking down the street. We have the impression that this overwhelming attention is somewhat unnatural in this picture compared to the other one, to the previous one. And of course here the identity of this woman is not revealed. We look at her from the back, and by not revealing her face, her identity is hidden, conveying a sort of symbol representing all the women. So if we look at both pictures and we compare them, we find the same attention, the same looks by the same kind of men dressed in their suit, sitting on their Vespas and Lambrettas, like they were the only gender allowed in the streets of Milan and Florence. So even if the lady dressed in white is, of course, the focal point of the picture, I would say that this evident attention conveyed by the looks of this man become another main focal point of the photo that, of course, is immortalized by the eye of the camera. And I wanted to share with you this couple of pictures to reflect together on how a simple action, walking down the street, could provoke a certain kind of reaction. This picture conveys more than what you actually see. We are in front of a display of a different culture, different behaviors, different manners given away by the looks, these attitudes, and these reactions of this man. men in this case, of course, that act and react according to the codes of their own culture and their perspective of life in particular situation. Both these pictures shows how living abroad takes us in a different world and how people can act and react in a different way than what we're accustomed to. And I'm convinced that in the picture, Gli Italiani si voltano, in this one, the lady in white was probably expecting, because of course it was staged, so she was expecting this kind of reaction from this gentleman around her. But I would assume that it would not be the case for the American girl in Italy. So the camera here immortalized not only a frame of time, but also a frame of Italian culture. Orkin and her friend, even if amused, of course in this moment, they are living a cross-cultural moment of their journey. They witness with their own eyes the expectation of visitors in a foreign country who belong to a different culture, and the reactions of the people of the host country are not always the same. So the two pictures actually exemplify what we call in cross-cultural studies the middle layer of culture. Explicit culture reflects deeper layers of the culture itself. It displays the norms and the values of the individual group. Norms that convey how we should behave, and values that convey, of course, how to aspire or desire how to behave. So this is why before leaving our country, to go on a journey and living in a foreign country, it should be appropriate for us to ask ourselves, what does it mean to live abroad? What does it mean to live abroad in a cross-cultural dimension? Are there similarities and differences between the culture of the host country and our own? How can we overcome these cultural differences? Are we familiar with the core values of the host country? How can we get prepared for a cross-cultural journey? So up to the moment we go abroad and we experience everyday life facing and interacting with foreign people who are the expression of their culture, we don't have the basis for believing that other people might not behave like us. Considering true the fact that people of different culture tend to share basic concepts about life, but they view them from a different perspectives, of course this automatically makes us realize that living abroad is also living constantly in what we define a cross-cultural dimension. And as a matter of fact, our journey can be seen as a cross-cultural journey where our cultural background will have to face constantly the culture one of the host country. I would say what travelers, expats, business people tend sometimes to forget is this cross-cultural aspect of their journey, assuming that knowing how to get around the country, to speak few words of the language, translate automatically to know the culture, especially in referring to the core norms and beliefs of the country itself. So living abroad, of course, for purpose of studying or working assignments, entails to be able to live across culture and be able to interact effectively with local people. It is important to work across the cultures. The core of intercultural awareness is being able to separate what we call, of course, the observation phase from, of course, the interpretation phase. We have to postpone the interpretation phase until we know enough about the culture. Otherwise, if we don't do so, we tend to judge, and of course we start having stereotypes. And we have to avoid, and I stress avoid, the stereotypes that are the cause of the one of major barrier of communicating across culture. Because of cross-cultural differences in what we consider normal, right, and good, cross-cultural interaction are subject to all kinds of confusion, misunderstanding, and misinterpretations. So speaking the language is with no doubt a useful tool, of course, to interact and integrate quickly in the host country, but of course is not by far the only one. Understanding and recognizing the common elements and react positively to the differences of the new culture are the key of a successful interaction and communication among people that belong to different cultural backgrounds. So what does it mean to live in a cross-cultural dimension? That we interact in an unfamiliar social and cultural environment with our own cultural background. We're out of our comfort zone and out of our own social and cultural dimension. What we tend to do, we try to make comparisons between our native culture and the host country's culture in order to find similarities to adapt better to the new surroundings. And if our cultural values, customs, and behavior are recognized by the people of the host country and vice versa, of course, a possible cultural clash can occur. And of course, here I would say that it's common that it's not the behavior of the local that cause out this cultural incidents, but it's our own. The fact that we assume that both cultures present similar components is actually what in the majority of cases causes cultural incidents. Usually the main reason why culture clash occur are not due to the behaviors, but to the expectations that we have towards the people of the host country. The problem is not what local people do or how they behave, but it's when we're expecting them to behave and react based on our own cultural base. So not changing our behaviors, but reconsider and modify our expectation according to the norms and values of the host culture is the key to avoid this cultural clash. And the way to prevent this cultural incident is to stop assuming that other people, of course, are like us. And here, of course, the question that we have to start looking, and I would like that you look close to these cultural types, the Lewis model, where you will see that, of course, your culture and my culture are completely opposite. So the question that comes up now is, are American and Italian cultures so different and so far apart? According to this expert in cross-cultural communication, Dr. Lewis, that of course is exemplifying this cultural model, yes, we are. We are very different. Lewis developed a method of testing cultural types so that individuals can determine their own cultural profiles. Personal factors such, of course, age, professions, field of study, psychological and context in which the individual operates are important factors for the categorization of the culture, of course. So let's see if this works. Yes. See, according to Lewis' model, see, Italy is over there, and we are considered a multi-active culture. Of course, with Spain, Brazil, Venezuela, Mexico, Colombia. Can you see also this across continent, but we have much more in common. And of course, we are multi-active, or we also define affective culture. We display more warmth, emotional, loquacious, impulsive. And of course, American culture is more, of course, next to the linear active culture, a little bit more cool, factual, decisive, planners. And of course, it's very different for more the Asian cultures that are, of course, called or defined reactive cultures. Okay? They're very accommodating, compromiser, they're very good listener. Can you see the differences? And of course, we are so far away. Can you see that? So of course, let's look together the differences between the multi-active culture, of course, Italian, we're multi-active, and American linear active culture. And here, my students know that, of course, it's just We just compare. We compare each other. It's not that one is better than the other, right? But we are so different in how we view and how we act and react in life. Of course, this is generalization, not for everybody. You understand what I'm saying? But look, multi-ethnic culture, more extrovert, impatient, compared to you guys, more reserved, more patient. Talkative, interrupts frequently. This is my big fault with my students. And listener, see, they listen, they rarely interrupt. Display emotional behavior compared to, you keep more your emotion private. Not that you don't have emotion, don't get me wrong. You keep them more private. We are much more inquisitive. You are more private, not punctual. Get accustomed to that. You are much more punctual and precise. Plans general outlines. Yes, and my students know that too. I don't follow any schedule, am I? No, it's not. Oh, here we go. General. If my students are better than me, plans ahead methodically. Social and group-oriented, self-achievement of the individual. Confront with emotions and feelings. Confront more with logic, facts, and data. Schedule or plans can change. And my students know about me a lot. The syllabus is there because it has to be there. But then do I follow my syllabus? Not really. I'm very flexible with my syllabus. Instead, of course, the linear active culture stick more to plans, schedules on time, agenda, unlimited body language. I'm making a very big effort right now, to tell you the truth. And limited body language, okay? So you see, of course, the differences. So in a certain way, for instance, linear active culture prefer accomplishing tasks one at a time, concentrate hard and do all within a frame of time, because being punctual, respecting the agenda, plans ahead, are carefully followed by you guys because it's a synonym of being more efficient and you get more done. You do. Instead of multi-active cultures seem not to give much more importance to schedules and plan, and they pretend to observe them, of course, if the linear partner observe it. So we have to do it. So, of course, here, how can we overcome these cultural differences? And when we go on a journey abroad, the first step of our trip actually is made at home. We always have to remind ourselves that we make the choice to live in another country. And as a consequence, we live in a cross-cultural dimension during that period of time. We choose that. So it is your duty in this particular case before going to Rome, to recognize and understand the cultural differences without, and I underline this part, without losing and never underestimating your own cultural background. And historical events and different geographical features have contributed to establish cultural, social, and economic diversity, of course. And thanks to its diversity, Italy actually has not one single cultural identity. Each region offers different forms of micro-society that intermingle together, creating multiple regional cultural differences which can be recognized in daily social interactions. So northern Italy is closer, of course, to northern European countries in both location and spirit. We are recognized to be more modern, industrialized, secular, organized, of course within inverted commas, precise, reliable, where people are social and jovial, but are more job-oriented and more reserved. Southern Italy has much more in common, of course, with the Eastern Mediterranean countries, and North African countries as far as location, mentality, and the way of life, and recognized to be more traditional, related to more an agricultural, rural life, family dominance, where people tend to be more social and outspoken. So I would say that despite these differences between the north and the south of Italy, of course, by traveling, you will observe the difference between the north and, of course, how people behave in the north part of Italy compared to the center-south. In general, of course, Italians are recognized to be nice and friendly, outgoing people, sharing common cultural core values, such as, of course, look at the core values: family, friends, work, religion, quality of life, and love for beauty. And I know maybe some of you right now are thinking, well, this is the core value of my country as well, right? We believe in family. I have a lot of friends. I have a very good ethic at work. I practice my religion. I want to have a quality of life. And I like the love for beauty as well in general. Of course, this is in the right part. I give you a little bit more of the details about Italian. So American, we have the core values of our life are in common. Is the way we view and we act and react upon these core values that are going to be a little bit different, as we've seen before. Okay? So always be aware to always remember that. So one of the common cultural characteristics of Italians is that we share, of course, and a lot the use of body language. We are known worldwide as excellent non-verbal communicators. Italians tend to talk a lot and love talking and interacting, so we are considered this affective culture. So to convey their ideas, not only they will use extensive vocabulary, hands, facial expression, and make sure to use the correct tone and pitch of voice. They don't want to be dramatic. This is how you're going to perceive them, or maybe how my student perceive me sometimes. They want you to know how they feel. They will appeal and pick up to your generosity, warm heart, and good sense. Italian in general tend to exhibit and not separate. So the emotions flow easily without inhibition. Physical contact, gesturing, and animated expression, of course, are common in Italy. Americans, of course, belonging more to a linear, active, and neutral culture, tend to exhibit emotion, but yet you separate them from objective and rational decisions. In general, Americans tend to consider emotions outside of range of control, distorted and disguised for behavior, and essentially neglected in communication. Neutral culture, like Americans, yes, they prefer a self-conduct way of life. We need to be careful, especially for people that are not taking Italian, physical distance and personal space. So Italian, like other Southern European culture, tend to stay closer to interlocutors when interacting, so they do not respect the space, and sometimes they're going to have the tendency of maybe putting your hand, the hand on your arm, for example, but of course, and you're gonna tend to step backward, and they're gonna move forward. So it's gonna be like a dance. Okay, so be careful about that. So you already know that. So you know how to react now, and of course, accordingly, of course, of the situation. But you will be more accustomed now that you know so. Greetings with kisses and embrace, and public displays of affection are common not only in private, but in public surroundings as well. So you're going to be more exposed to that as well, means in transportation, in piazza, so be careful about that so you know how to react now properly accordingly, okay? And of course with you today, living in Italy, the travelers, you guys, will hear the expression very often, dobbiamo fare la bella figura. That translated into English, to make the best possible impression in different occasions. Along with this impression, we can also mention farsi bello, farsi bella, that translate into make themselves, of course, looking good. So despite the common association of this expression of course, the love that Italians have for fashion and the beauty in general, due to art, of course, this expression goes beyond the art of dressing well. So let's read a little bit over here to give a good image of yourself in social etiquette and dressing code. It is always polite and respectful to greet and acknowledge people all the time. Fare bella figura is more than to dress well, of course, and appropriately, but it extends to your confidence and your style. And so it reflects the manners and the behaviors that you have. Of course, wearing nice, comfortable, casual, or elegant clothes, depending, is a sign of respect and a good manners no matter where you go, the event you attend, or people you're with. So, for example, you will never see also in supermarket people going with sweater pants or stuff like that. So you have to be a little bit more careful in how we're in your culture, certain kind of, clothing etiquette are accepted, but in Italy sometimes are not. Okay, so be careful about this. So dress code is important. Why? Of course, to wear appropriate clothes help us to avoid giving, of course, the wrong signals. Otherwise, of course, because you have always to remember, you are facing a different culture, so people are gonna not see you, oh, but in America it's perfectly fine going around like this, or wearing this kind of pants or this kind of shorts, or you understand what I'm saying? You're in a foreign country, so you have to always aware, well, we are not in the United States anymore, so we have to be a little bit more careful about that. So always consider and remind these points. And where can we witness the Italian culture and observing Italians doing and performing this la bella figura? Of course, in the numerous piazzas all over Italy that are the stages of theatrical life of its inhabitants. Beside the famous Italian piazza known abroad, of course, due to the beauty of famous churches, art, and monuments, piazzas also in smaller towns can be fascinated as famous ones in both where social and cultural interaction occur. In this particular picture, you're looking at the Piazza Ducale, La Torre del Bramante, the Tower Bell. La Torre del Bramante is the Tower Bell over there, in the small town south of Milan called Vigevano, which is a portrait of Renaissance architecture completed in 1492 and was commissioned by the Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza, was native of this town. And this enclosed open urban space is where you can witness the cultural and social functions of the Italian society. So of course, as I tell my students all the time, I know you go to Italy to look and admire all the beauty of art and monuments and history, and that's perfectly fine. But also at the meantime, in the same time, try also to observe and look the cultural way of living. Also when you are admiring the beauty of art and history all around you, and how people, of course, from a different culture behave. So the Tower Bell in the picture, La Torre del Bramante, is famous architecture of the Renaissance that beats the time, where the piazza is the theater of these daily activities, civil, religious, commercial, during the day, and assume a sentimental atmosphere in the evening where everybody gathers to see and to be seen. So benches, walls, steps, chairs in cafe are comfortable seats to admire this lively cultural scenario. So no matter the definition related to its function, can be la piazza della chiesa, quindi the church piazza, piazza affari, the business piazza, piazza del mercato, the market piazza. So anyway, all these piazza are the best live theater to get started in getting acquainted with the experience and ultimately understand, of course, the Italian culture. And in every piazza, the tower bell beats the time, and of course we know that. In Italy, time is viewed as synchronic, where past, present, and future are interrelated so that ideas of the future and always the memory of the past shape your present actions. Italian, like other culture that share this conception of time, so of course I'm referring more to the Mediterranean culture, do not give importance on punctualities, schedules and agendas, and you will see that taking the trains or using the means of transportation, especially in Rome, where nothing is punctual. And not that the passage of time is not important, don't get me wrong, but is to give the time to people and sharing human interactions that are much more important. And even if it does imply to change the schedule of your day. So most natural and linear culture have a sequential view of the time. And you perceive the time more as a series of passing events. In all culture, of course, the conception of time is affected by the culture because time is seen as an idea rather than an object. And this influences how people in different cultures plan, organize their activities with one another. Of course, they live their lives. And in the conception of time, of course, one of the famous expressions, il dolce far niente, the sweetness of doing nothing, has become one of the most popular cultural definitions linked to the idea of the Italian dolce vita. Sweetness of doing nothing. Well, in the United States, this expression would refer to a killing time, a crude and brutal term that implies wastefulness. So it will have a very negative connotation. And despite the expression could lead to the foreigner to think that Italians like being lazy and like doing nothing, for Italians this expression assumes, of course, a positive connotation all over the peninsula. This expression not only reminds us of the joy of living and sharing life with one another, but implies the delight and the spontaneity of doing things for just the pleasure of doing it. So it has a positive. And Italians show how they value people by giving them, of course, their own personal time. So even if, for example, sometimes in America when I came here, they used to tell, oh, do you want to go out for a coffee? Yes, but let's look at my schedule. I don't know if sometimes you do so. Let's look at my schedule. And I say, why she doesn't want to go out with me and have a coffee? You understand what I'm saying? Instead, of course, for us, oh, really? When I have a coffee? Oh, yeah, I have to work, but don't worry. Well, let's go for 5 minutes and then, you understand? We're very flexible. Okay, so we tend to view the time in a different way. Okay? Quindi try, of course, they're going to give you, when they like you and they feel that, of course, they want to stay in your company, they're going to give you their personal time and they will put their own things that they do everyday life, they pass in a second moment. You are the priority for them. Okay? So to postpone time, where these human values and frequency of emotion are expressed, suggests for Italians a lack of care and sincerity. So if you do not do so, they will react and say, okay, she doesn't or he doesn't want to come or stay with me. So they're going to say they're not sincere, or why they don't care for me. They will see it in a very different way. Instead, you say, well, I have my things to do, and then when my schedule is, is going to be done, I will give you my time. It's not that I love you less. See how you view things in a different way. Instead of Italian that do not know American culture, say, well, they don't care for me. See how they will react in a very different perspective. And here the picture of the Tower Bell, of course, again, we focus a little bit more on La Torre del Bramante. Of course, this is just an example. In Vigevano, that was built, of course, by Ludovico Sforza of Milan to embellish, of course, La Piazza Ducale. And so far, we have associated the Tower Bell with the beat of the time and the conception of time in the Italian culture. But the tower bells are beyond the landmarks associated only with time. They represent a cultural and social aspect of Italian time. And it's common living in Italy hearing about the word campanilismo, which describe a way of life and how life is conceived and lived in Italy. Il campanile, which is the tower bell, is always associated with the word campanilismo and vice versa. So the word campanilismo doesn't have a specific English translation and derives from campanile. The campanile, traditionally the tallest and the most prominent building in any town or village, has become in the concept of campanilismo an enduring symbol of devotion and love for, of course, region, city, town, village, and even the quartiere, which is the small district of each town. Quindi the conception of campanilismo related, of course, to il campanile is a very important aspect of life in Italy, symbolizing a sense of identity, of pride, of belonging to the place of your birth, a feeling which is usually much stronger to an Italian than any sense of national identity. In fact, when you're going to travel in Italy, sometimes people are going to say, I'm from Venice, sono veneziano. I'm from Rome, sono romano. I'm from Milan, sono milanese, before telling you sono italiano. And of course, in order to explain this cultural phenomenon and why people will tell you that, you have to remember that Italy, of course, has been unified just in 1861. So, of course, it's a young, modern nation, even if, of course, we have one of the longest Western tradition, of course. But we are a very young nation, okay? So, of course, if there is not this pride, we're becoming Italians actually when we go abroad. But before, when we are in Italy, people really belong to, of course, its own town, its own region. So separate states that were often, of course, fighting amongst themselves, and each one, of course, had their own language, because in Italy you will see that in each region, okay, and after the unification of Italy in 1861, they also back then they did not speak standard Italian, of course. In each region people used to speak, and they still speak nowadays, the dialects. Okay, so actually after, I would say, the Second World War, and with of course, the mass communication, of course, the radio and then of the television, and of course they make compulsory to go to school, this is when Italy, of course, and Italians started feeling this unification and started learning the standard Italian that we learn in class. But of course, before, each one was really related to its own region and, of course, its own culture and its own dialect. Okay? So these days, despite Italian political unification and the effects of this mass media, which has a certain extent that has helped this homogenizing this Italian life, il campanilismo, this cultural aspect, continue to exist very much. And of course, one example for you to understand what I would like to hear to explain when I talk about this phenomenon of campanilismo is the famous, maybe some of you that maybe have been to Siena or have been to Italy already, maybe have assisted, is il Palio, in the city of Siena, in the region of Tuscany, in Piazza del Campo. And in Italy, of course, there are still deeply rooted these rivalries between different regions, provinces, towns, and especially I quartieri. Quindi, of course, we said that there are the districts of each town. The Palio di Siena is a horse race that is held twice each year on July the 2nd and August 16 in Siena. And 10 horses and riders, bareback and dressed in their appropriate colors, represent 10 of the 17 contrade, or city wards. The Palio that is held on July the 2nd is named il Palio di Provenzano, and in honor of La Madonna di Provenzano, quindi the Virgin Mary of Provenzano, and of course that has a major city in Siena that you can go visit. And instead of the Palio that is held on August 16 is named Palio dell'Assunta, of course in honor of the Assumption, of course, of the Virgin Mary. And here, let's see. can you see this map over here? This is the map of Siena, and of course here they exemplified, the different districts that also nowadays, of course, is divided in different districts that are called le contrade, okay? And people belonging to each one of the districts is called the contradaioli, okay? And of course, I will explain to you, they have their coat of arms and banners, and it's a very beautiful cultural event that if you want to assist that, okay? Quindi since the Middle Ages, the city of Siena has been divided in these 17 districts that are called le contrade. People of the contrade are called, of course, I contradaioli, so they belong to each contrada. Each contrada has their own banner and coats of arms and heraldic beads. The field consists of 10 horses, and so not all the 17 contrade can take part in the palio of any occasion. The 7 contrade that did not take part in the month of the previous year are, of course, automatically included. 3 or more are chosen by draw. Each contrada is named after an animal or symbol, and each with its own long history and complicated set of heraldic and semi-mythological associations. And these districts were set up in the Middle Ages in order to supply troops to the many military companies that were hired, of course, to defend Siena, la Repubblica di Siena back then, of course, and it fought to defend its independence from Florence, of course, la Repubblica di Firenze, and other nearby city-states. And as time goes by, of course, since the Middle Ages, can you imagine that? The contrada, of course, right now in the modern age, have lost this administrative and military functions and have instead become simply areas of localized patriotism. Their role have broadened so that every important event, like baptism, deaths, marriages, church holidays, victories of the Palio as well, food festival, is celebrated only within one's own contrada. So the race is preceded by a spectacular pageant, which is il corteo is called il corteo storico, which includes, among many other, gli alfieri, so they are the flag wavers, in medieval costumes. The parade has always occurred before the Palio since the race's inception. It is a formally choreographed triumphal march that commemorates the ancient institution, customs, and greatness of the Republic of Siena. Special attention is given to the contrade, whose participants form the main part of the parade. The parade takes place in Piazza del Campo with 14 groups and a total of almost 700 participants. So in the early afternoon on the day of the Palio, members of the town, they gather in the courtyard of the Palace of Justice under command of the Field Marshal. They line up in the Piazza del Duomo next to the cathedral. The procession enters the Piazza del Campo on the first toll of the bell on the Torre del Mangia. The central focus of the procession is the passing of the carroccio, the modern counterpart of the Republic ancient triumphal chariot, on which the silken colorful Palio banner is hosted. And here you can see a little bit just pictures, but if you're interested also, if you go on YouTube, they have, of course, videos of the Palio di Siena that is, of course, very, and it's still twice a year in Siena since the Middle Ages there have been this horse race. So it is really, really a wonderful, it can be a little bit dangerous, especially if you are in the middle of Piazza del Campo. So if you want to go and assist, be careful, because they can be it can be sometimes a little bit dangerous. The race is called la corsa or la carriera, and it is won by the horse that makes 3 runs of the Piazza del Campo with or without the jockey. Actually the jockeys usually they fall down and sometimes, but the horse, even if it doesn't have the jockey, of course you can win the race. So the prize is in the palio, o il drappellone viene chiamato, that is a rectangular silk hand-painted banner that is taken back to be blessed in the church of the winning contrada. And of course, why I wanted to, and I choose in particular, of course, Il Palio di Siena as a cultural event, because this intense battle of a horse race between these different contrade of Siena helps us really to understand the depth of the feeling evoked by the conception of campanilismo. These sentiments are so strong, in fact, that it is uncommon, of course, in Siena, to marry someone from another rival contrada. So basically, they're very, very linked to each own district. So it's something that I think you should go and experience. And in the evening, of course, the city acquires a festive atmosphere. Local specialty cuisine with Sienese food and wine are served to all the contradaioli. Of course, during the day they set up all the food and all the tables and chairs, and then in the evening, of course, it's a very big, wonderful, time to party and stay with people of your own community. But of course, they do it in the piazza as a local place where people gather together and they share the time in this conception of giving the time to everybody in order to have this sweetness of life. And you see all the conception that we'll talk about it right now. I think the Palio di Siena actually resume a little bit all this different conception that we have tried, of course, to define today. And of course, in the last two pictures over there, they have what they call La Cena della Vittoria, where together they, at the table of honor, usually are seated the winner, of course, and leaders of the winning contrada. Okay, so the banquets and the feast, which can last for a whole week, are organized for everybody to enjoy. So they can be a very long festivity. So in conclusion of our little journey in the approach of the Italian culture, we could say that groups of people that organize themselves in such a way that to increase this effectiveness of their way of living, and different groups of people have developed in different geographic regions that have formed different sets of logical assumptions. So after the first approach, and after the recognition of the explicit culture, the travelers should know this assumption and values upon which one's own cultural behavior rests. So then they must be able to contrast these assumptions and values with these of the host culture and discover, of course, always the areas of cultural differences that are relevant to this particular situation. But of course, the most important, this mutual knowledge and the understanding of the relevant cultural differences can be used to create this common ground for a successful intercultural communication and, of course, an enricher cross-cultural journey. So I hope that you will have an amazing trip in Italy, and always try to remember to understand and prepare a little bit yourself in saying, and how you, when you get there, do not immediately react if something that is you're not accustomed to, and not tend to judge and give, of course, a prejudice or stereotypes, but try to understand why certain people are doing certain kind of action, and then you're going to react in a positive way, always keeping in your mind your cultural background, and you will react, of course, in a positive way to enrich yourself, because otherwise traveling is not just, as I tell my students, especially when you go to Italy, there is so much to see that you are overwhelmed by the beauty of culture and arts and history that sometimes people tend not to also embrace in a certain way the beauty of Italian people as well. So try to also a little bit get exposed to that, and of course to have an overwhelming and beautiful journey. Okay? Sure. Also, before, if you need any suggestions, my students know that. But even if you're not students of Italian, of course, Dr. Forte and I are always here. Or you can email us if you have any, you don't know. Maybe sometimes they ask me some suggestion of touring around in Italy or places to go or where to go. Please don't hesitate to email or also come to my office. And of course, I will help you out to set up a little trip if you don't have a clear idea where to go, because there is a lot to see. Okay, so enjoy.